Today we'll start working our way through the Christmas story as Scripture records it. The first part of the Christmas story actually occurs in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is very, very interesting. Essentially, the book of Genesis is the story of 5 people. The first 4 chapters, we get the basic problem of mankind laid out. The story is the story of Adam. And the problem is the problem of sin. Adam and Eve commit sin and are banned from the Garden of Eden. They have 2 sons. One of their sons murders his brother. Then we get a little list at the end of chapter 4 of the development of mankind and the problems even that they developed. Well, in chapter 5, verse 1, we have the statement, "This is the book of the genealogy of Adam." And then we get a genealogy. Interesting, keep that in mind. We have the story of Noah and how God destroyed the earth. But he saved Noah and his family. But the problem of sin that had pervaded the earth follows Noah. Noah himself is sinful, and his descendants also become sinful. We get the story of the Tower of Babel at this time. Then in chapter 11, verse 27, something new takes place. And it starts by saying the genealogy of Terah. Now we have a short genealogy following that, not very long at all, because very quickly we're introduced to Abraham, who becomes now the 3rd key figure in the book of Genesis. And again, with Abraham, a wonderful fellow, and he follows the Lord, but he too can't live up to God's standards. He also sins. We come then to chapter 25, verse 19, the genealogy of Isaac. And there's no genealogy that follows. Instead, it's a story. This is our real indication that the use of the word "the genealogy of" is not so much to present a genealogy as it is to divide the book of Genesis into 5 sections. Isaac, from the very start, he's a deceiver. He tricks his brother. He ends up going at a distance to find a wife. His wife's family tricks him. He returns to Palestine, where his father Isaac lives, reconciles with his brother, but the rest of his life is difficult. He has troubles. We come then to chapter 37, verse 2. The genealogy of Jacob. And there is no mention of a genealogy at all. Instead, we're presented with Joseph. And we have the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph almost makes it. He almost is the perfect example. But at the start of his life, he's a little full of himself. He ends up getting himself sold to a traveling band of marauders by his brothers. You know the story, ends up in slavery in Egypt, but rises to the 2nd position in all of Egypt. Saves his family, but until the very end, we're kind of left wondering just how Joseph is going to respond to his brothers. Well, it all works out in the end. But the point of the book of Genesis is to show that there is no solution to the problem of sin. Now, why is this so important? Look at Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1. Matthew starts the book of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. He uses the same formula that Moses used to divide the book of Genesis into 5 sections. The implication is kind of obvious. Matthew sees Jesus as continuing Israel's history. The book of Genesis tries to present a solution to sin, and all of the Old Testament shows man trying to overcome the problem of sin, but they never quite make it. Matthew writes his book, and he uses at the very start this phrase that's going to make the readers think of the book of Genesis, the history of Israel. Then he builds the history of Jesus to represent the history of Israel. He records certain things in the history of Jesus that other authors don't mention. But it's important to Matthew because he shows Jesus reliving the history of Israel. First, Joseph takes his son Jesus and his wife Mary into Egypt to save them, just like Jacob took his sons into Egypt to save them. We see the baptism of Jesus. Israel, when they came out of Egypt, they went through the Red Sea. In fact, in 2 different occasions in the New Testament, that's called their baptism. Now, right after Israel went through the Red Sea, they spent 40 years in the desert, just like Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. At the end of the 40 days, we have Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. In the Sermon on the Mount, the disciples received Jesus' instruction. In Mount Sinai, Israel receives God's instruction through Moses. After that, Moses' face is transfigured. In the book of Matthew, we have the transfiguration of Jesus' entire body. And who does he end up talking to? Moses and Elijah. All through here, Matthew is trying to just remember things that happened in Jesus' life that were similar to the history of Israel. The big difference is in the Old Testament, there is no solution for sin. But in the book of Matthew, everything points to the crucifixion and the resurrection, where the problem of sin is resolved. The Christmas story begins in the book of Genesis. Jesus relives Israel's history, but this time he provides a solution for the problem of sin. Remember that this year as we work our way through the story of Jesus.